Sandra stood up suddenly, her face flushed with anger, and pointed a finger at me. "Victoria, I need to talk to you right now," she said, her voice loud enough to silence the room. "There's money missing from Derek's firm, and I have every reason to believe you're the one who took it." Before I could respond, Sandra grabbed the glass of wine in front of her and, with a furious motion, threw it directly at me. The wine splattered across my face, and the room fell into a stunned silence. My parents, Derek, and everyone else at the party stared in shock as I stood there, dripping with wine. "Hello everyone, my name is Victoria, and I'm 34 years old. My life has always revolved around my family. We've been through many ups and downs together, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm Sandra would bring into our lives." At first, we all welcomed her with open arms, but it wasn't long before her true colors began to show. What started as small, seemingly innocent comments escalated into manipulation and deceit that threatened to tear our family apart. I run an event planning business here in New York. It's a fast-paced career, but I've always loved the thrill of organizing weddings and corporate events, ensuring every detail is perfect. My younger brother, Derek, is the one person who has always understood my drive. We've been inseparable since childhood. He's 30 now and runs his own marketing firm, which had become quite successful over the years. No matter how busy life got for either of us, we always made time for each other and our parents. Our parents are retired now, enjoying their golden years with peace and quiet. They raised Derek and me to be supportive, to look out for one another, and we did, until Sandra entered the picture. It all began about 2 years ago when Derek met Sandra. I remember the night he first told me about her. "Victoria, I've met someone incredible. Her name is Sandra, and I think she's the one," he said, his eyes glowing with excitement. Of course, I was thrilled for him. Derek had always been careful about relationships, and to see him so genuinely happy gave me hope that he'd finally found someone special. Sandra seemed perfect at first, charming, witty, and attentive. When Derek introduced her to the family, she was polite, engaging, and made an effort to fit in. At first, everything seemed great. Sandra quickly became a regular part of our family gatherings, and for a while, she played her role well. But as time went on, I started noticing little things, subtle remarks that had an edge to them, remarks that seemed like compliments on the surface but carried a sting underneath. One night, after I mentioned a late night at work, Sandra smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Victoria, still chasing those deadlines? Don't worry, you'll figure out how to balance work and life eventually." It stung. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was being too sensitive, but those remarks kept coming. Little jabs about my career, my choices, and even my relationship with Derek. I didn't want to create tension, so I kept quiet. After all, Derek was clearly head over heels for her, and I didn't want to be the one to stir trouble. But Sandra's influence over Derek grew stronger with each passing day. He became more distant, relying on her for decisions he would have once made on his own. Our once close relationship felt strained, and every time we disagreed, he sided with her without question. The worst part was, he didn't seem to realize how much he was changing. Then the breaking point came at a family dinner. We were gathered at our parents' house for what should have been a pleasant evening, but the tension between Sandra and me had been simmering for weeks. She had been making veiled comments throughout the meal, and I was struggling to keep my temper in check. But what came next shattered any hope of peace. Suddenly, Sandra stood up, her voice loud and accusing. "Victoria, I need to talk to you," she began, her eyes flashing with anger. "There's been money missing from Derek's firm, and I have every reason to believe you're the one who's been taking it." I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "I would never steal from Derek. This is absurd." But Sandra wasn't done. "The financial records show money disappearing for months," she continued, her voice rising. "You've been using it for your event planning business, haven't you?" Before I could even respond, she picked up her glass of wine and, in one furious motion, threw it right at me. The wine splashed across my face, and the room fell into silence. I stood there, dripping with wine, completely humiliated. My parents, who had been watching in shock, finally spoke up. "Sandra, this is a serious accusation," my father said, his voice stern. "Do you have any proof?" But before she could answer, I cut in. "I've never touched a single dollar from Derek's firm. Sandra, if anyone's been stealing, it's you." Sandra's face tightened, but she didn't back down. "You can deny it all you want, Victoria, but the records don't lie. Derek, you need to see for yourself," she said, turning to my brother, her voice softening as if she were the victim. Derek looked torn, his eyes darting between Sandra and me. "Victoria, is there any truth to what she's saying?" he asked, his voice strained. I need to know the truth." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own brother was questioning me because of her lies. "Derek, I would never steal from you," I said, trying to hold back the frustration in my voice. "Sandra is the one you need to be looking at. I don't know what's going on, but I swear I'm not involved in any of this." But Derek's face was clouded with doubt. Sandra had gotten to him, and I could see that her manipulation was working. My parents tried to intervene, but the tension in the room was palpable. "Derek, we've known Victoria her entire life. She would never do such a thing," my mother said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Maybe we should look into this further before jumping to conclusions," my father added. "An independent audit might clear things up." Sandra, sensing the family starting to side with me, quickly interjected. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly calm and composed. "If Victoria's innocent, then she has nothing to worry about. Let's get an audit done and see what the records show." Derek nodded slowly, still clearly conflicted. "That seems fair. We'll have the firm's accounts audited by an independent third party. If there's anything wrong, we'll get to the bottom of it." The next few days were agonizing. Derek immediately hired a forensic accountant to audit his firm's finances, and I was left in limbo, knowing I had done nothing wrong but fearing what Sandra might have hidden. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had set me up somehow. Zoe, my best friend since college, was the only person I could turn to. We met for coffee the day after the dinner, and I poured out my frustration. "I don't understand why Derek can't see through her," I said, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "Sandra's been manipulating him from the start, and now she's trying to destroy my relationship with him." Zoe nodded, her face serious. "It sounds like Sandra's hiding something, and she's using you as a scapegoat to cover her tracks. She's been slowly isolating Derek from you and your family, which is classic manipulative behavior." "I just don't get why," I said, feeling helpless. "What does she gain from all this?" Zoe thought for a moment. "She's probably been taking money from Derek for a while now, and she's trying to pin the blame on you before anyone catches on. She knows if Derek finds out what she's been doing, it's over for her." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had suspected Sandra was behind all of this, but hearing Zoe lay it out so clearly made it real. "I just hope the audit proves the truth," I said, trying to stay hopeful. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." A week later, the results of the audit were in. Derek called a family meeting at his house, and I could tell by the tone of his voice that the news wasn't going to be easy to hear. My heart raced as I walked into the living room where Derek, my parents, and Sandra were already seated. The accountant, a middle-aged man with a serious demeanor, was sitting across from them with a thick folder of documents in his lap. The tension in the room was palpable. "Victoria, thanks for coming," Derek said, his voice strained. "The audit's been completed." I nodded, sitting down, and the accountant cleared his throat and opened the folder. "We've thoroughly reviewed the firm's financial records, and I'm afraid we found some serious discrepancies. Large sums of money, over $50,000, have been siphoned off into personal accounts over the past year." Sandra remained quiet, her face unreadable. And whose accounts? I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. The accountant glanced at Derek, then back at me. The funds were transferred into accounts under Sandra's name. My stomach dropped. I looked at Derek, whose face had gone pale. Sandra? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Sandra's face flushed with sudden panic. Derek, this is a mistake. I didn't take any money. Someone must have framed me. Maybe Victoria's behind this. I stood up, shaking with anger. Are you kidding me, Sandra? You've been lying from the start. You tried to blame me for your own crimes. Derek was silent, his eyes filled with disbelief. Sandra, is this true? She tried to reach for him, but he pulled back. Derek, you have to believe me, she pleaded, her voice desperate. I would never do this to you. But the evidence was clear. Derek shook his head slowly, his heart clearly breaking. I don't know what to believe anymore. Sandra's face crumbled, and her composure shattered as she realized the gravity of the situation. Derek, please, you have to trust me. This isn't what it looks like. Her voice was shaking now, but Derek stood firm, taking a step away from her, his expression one of betrayal. How could you do this to me? He whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. You were my wife. I trusted you, I defended you, and you've been stealing from me all along. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, but there was no sympathy left for her in the room. My parents sat in stunned silence, unable to process the extent of her deceit. I watched the scene unfold, feeling a mixture of relief that the truth was finally out and sorrow for my brother, whose heart was clearly breaking. You've been lying to everyone, I said, my voice steady now, the anger from earlier subsiding. You tried to ruin my relationship with Derek, and you nearly succeeded. But the truth has a way of coming out. Sandra looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no denying it anymore. You need to leave, Derek said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. You've destroyed everything. Tears streamed down Sandra's face as she gathered her things, her hands shaking. Derek, please, I can explain. No, Derek interrupted, his tone final. There's nothing left to explain. Sandra hesitated for a moment. Then, realizing that there was no way to salvage the situation, she turned and walked out of the door, her departure leaving a deafening silence in her wake. The weeks that followed were difficult for all of us, especially Derek. The woman he had loved, the woman he thought he knew, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. His marketing firm had taken a major financial hit, but more than that, his trust had been shattered. He threw himself into his work, trying to rebuild what Sandra had almost destroyed, but the emotional toll was evident in everything he did. I did my best to support him, to remind him that he wasn't alone in this. Our parents were there for him as well, but the weight of what had happened still hung heavily over him. One evening, a few weeks after Sandra's departure, Derek and I sat in his office, surrounded by papers and files, as we worked to restructure his business. The silence between us was comfortable, but I could feel the sadness still lingering. I just don't understand how I didn't see it, Derek said suddenly, breaking the silence. How could I have been so blind? It wasn't your fault, I replied gently. Sandra was good at hiding who she really was. She fooled all of us for a long time. Derek shook his head. I feel like such an idiot. I defended her when I should have been questioning her. I even doubted you, Victoria, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I placed my hand on his shoulder, offering him a small smile. You were in love, Derek. Love makes us see what we want to see, not what's really there. But the important thing is that you know the truth now, and you're doing everything you can to move forward. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again. You will, I said, squeezing his shoulder. It'll take time, but you will, and when you do, you'll be stronger because of it. As the months passed, Derek's business slowly began to recover. He worked tirelessly, putting in long hours to rebuild the trust of his clients and repair the financial damage Sandra had caused. With the help of his legal team, he also filed charges against Sandra for embezzlement and fraud. It wasn't an easy decision, but he knew it was necessary to seek justice. The legal process moved forward, and Sandra was formally charged. The trial was difficult for Derek, but it brought closure. As more evidence came to light, it became clear that Sandra had been involved in fraudulent activities long before she had met Derek. She had used similar schemes with other partners, draining their finances and moving on before they realized what had happened. The day of the sentencing arrived, and Derek, my parents, and I sat in the courtroom as the judge handed down the final verdict. Sandra was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to Derek and her other victims. As she was led away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Justice had been served, and the nightmare Sandra had caused was finally over. Life after Sandra's arrest was far from easy, but it was a time of healing and rebuilding. Derek worked hard to restore his business and regain his confidence. He attended therapy to process the emotional damage Sandra had caused, and over time, I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders. Our family, though shaken, had come out stronger. The bond between Derek and me, which had been strained by Sandra's manipulation, was stronger than ever. We had faced a terrible storm, but we had weathered it together. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my parents, Derek, and I found ourselves laughing together again, something that had felt impossible just months earlier. It wasn't that the pain was gone, but we had learned how to move forward, knowing that we had each other. Looking back, the experience taught me so much about resilience, trust, and the power of family. Sandra's betrayal could have torn us apart, but instead, it brought us closer together. Derek's business is thriving once again, and while the scars of the past remain, they serve as a reminder of how far we've come. No matter what life throws at us, we know that we can face it together. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed Victoria's journey of betrayal and resilience. If you found this story engaging, please take a moment to like and subscribe for more tales that explore the strength of family and the power of truth. Your comments mean a lot to me, so feel free to share your thoughts below. Together, let's continue to uncover the stories that connect us all. Stay tuned for more exciting content.